If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible real-life stories that leave you thinking long after the video ends. Now let's dive into today's story. My name is Leo Blake, and until 3 months ago I thought I had it all figured out. 39 years old, decent job as an IT consultant, nice apartment in downtown Portland, and a wife who turned heads wherever we went. Lily Blake was everything I thought I wanted: ambitious, beautiful, and smart enough to keep me on my toes. The problem with having it all figured out is that life has a twisted sense of humor. It started on a Tuesday night in October. Lily came home late again, her heels clicking against our hardwood floors like a countdown timer I didn't know I was listening to. She worked in finance at Morrison & Associates, one of those glass tower firms where everyone wore expensive suits and talked about quarterly projections like they were discussing the weather. "How was work?" I asked from the couch, not looking up from my laptop. I was debugging code for a client, the kind of tedious work that paid the bills but slowly ate away at your soul. "Fine," she said, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "Arthur wants the team to stay late tomorrow. Big presentation coming up." Arthur Lang, her boss, the guy who drove a BMW and wore watches that cost more than my monthly salary. I'd met him exactly twice at company parties, and both times he'd managed to make me feel like I was wearing a cardboard suit again. I closed the laptop and turned to face her. That's the 4th time this month. Lily was already heading toward the bedroom, her fingers working at the buttons of her blouse. "It's important, Leo, some of us have careers that actually matter." The words hit like a slap, but I swallowed the response that came to mind. This was Lily's way, lately sharp edges where there used to be warmth. I told myself it was stress from work, that things would get better once her big project was finished. I was an idiot. The next evening she announced we were going to dinner with some friends. "Arthur's treating the team," she said, applying lipstick in the bathroom mirror. "You should come. It'll be fun, right?" I'd rather have spent the evening with a root canal, but I put on my best shirt and tried to convince myself that maybe this would be good for us. Maybe seeing Lily in her element would help me understand what was happening to my wife. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The restaurant was one of those places where the menu doesn't list prices and the waiters speak in hushed, reverent tones. Arthur had reserved a private dining room, and when we arrived I counted 8 people around the table. Lily's colleagues from Morrison & Associates, plus their significant others. Arthur stood when we entered, flashing that $1 million smile that probably closed deals and broke hearts in equal measure. "Leo, great to see you again, buddy." He shook my hand with the grip of a man who worked out with a personal trainer. "How's the computer business?" "It consulting?" I corrected, but he was already turning away. The dinner started pleasantly enough: good food, decent wine, conversation that stayed safely in neutral territory. I found myself sitting between Lily and a woman named Tara from HR who seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work. For a moment I let myself relax. That was my second mistake. It happened during dessert. Arthur had been drinking steadily throughout the meal, his voice getting louder, his jokes getting cruder. He was holding court at the head of the table, telling some story about a client meeting that had gone sideways. "So there I am," he said, gesturing with his wine glass, trying to explain derivatives to this guy who probably thinks compound interest is too complicated, and his wife, gorgeous woman, way out of his league. She leans over and whispers something in his ear. Arthur paused for effect, making sure he had everyone's attention. Turns out she was reminding him about their anniversary dinner. Poor bastard had completely forgotten. Polite laughter rippled around the table. I sensed where this was heading and felt my stomach tighten. "Which reminds me," Arthur continued, his eyes finding mine across the table, "Leo, you're a lucky man. Lily here was just telling us about your, what did you call it, reach your romantic scheduling system." The table went quiet. I looked at Lily, waiting for her to shut this down, to redirect the conversation away from our private life. Instead, she was smiling that bright social smile she used at parties. "Oh, that," she said with a laugh. "Leo likes to plan everything, even our intimate moments. He actually keeps a calendar." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I felt heat creeping up my neck, felt every pair of eyes at the table turning toward me. This wasn't true, or at least it wasn't the whole truth. Yes, I'd suggested we try to be more intentional about making time for each other, given how busy we'd both been, but the way Lily was presenting it, a calendar. Arthur's grin was predatory. "Now that's systematic of you. Leo, very organized. I bet you send meeting invites and everything." More laughter echoed louder. This time, my face flushed with heat and I could hear the rush in my ears. "It's not like that," I said, though my voice sounded faint even to me. "Oh, come on," Arthur pressed. "Don't be modest. Lily says You've got spreadsheets in everything, color-coded, right green for Go Redford, not tonight, honey. The table erupted. Even people I'd thought were decent were laughing now, and I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Lily had told them stories about our private life had turned our marriage into entertainment for her colleagues. I looked at my wife. Really looked at her and saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, not embarrassment or regret, but something colder, something that looked almost like contempt. You know what, Arthur? I stood up my chair, scraping against the floor. The laughter died instantly. You're absolutely right. I am organized. In fact, I'm organized enough to know exactly what this dinner is costing and exactly how much my share comes to. I pulled out my wallet and counted out bills, placing them carefully on the table in front of my plate that should cover my meal and drinks. As for the entertainment, I looked directly at Lily. Well, I guess that's on the house. The silence was deafening. I could see shock on some faces, satisfaction on others. Lily's mouth was open, but no words were coming out. If you'll excuse me, I said, grabbing my jacket from the back of my chair. I have some scheduling to do. I walked out of that restaurant with whatever dignity I had left, and I didn't look back, but I could hear them talking as the door closed behind me. Could hear Arthur's voice rising above the others. Well, that was awkward. Anyone want to split his dessert? The laughter that followed me into the parking lot was the sound of my marriage ending, though I didn't know it yet. I drove home through empty streets, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The apartment felt different when I walked in, smaller, somehow, like the walls had moved closer together. While I was gone, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on the couch, staring at the framed photos on the coffee table. Lily and me on our wedding day. Lily and me on vacation in Mexico. Lily and me at last year's company Christmas party, both of us smiling like we had the world figured out. All lies, apparently. She came home 3 hours later, her heels announcing her arrival. Long before she appeared in the living room, she'd been drinking. I could tell by the careful way she moved, the slight pause before she spoke. That was embarrassing, she said. Not quite meeting my eyes. For who? For everyone. You made a scene. Leo, these are my colleagues, my friends. I set down my glass and looked at her, really looked at her. When had she become this person? When had the woman I married turned into someone who would humiliate me for sport? Your friends. I repeated. Right, and what does that make me? She sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. Don't be dramatic. It was just a joke, just a joke. I stood up, feeling steadier than I had all evening. You turned our marriage into a punchline. Lily, our private life into entertainment for your boss and his drinking buddies. But it was just a joke. God, you're being so sensitive about this. It's not like I told them anything really personal. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This was the woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years, the woman who knew my fears and dreams and the way I liked my coffee in the morning, and she was standing there acting like our intimacy meant nothing. Get out. I said quietly. What? You heard me. Get out, go back to your friends. Go back to Arthur and his jokes, but get out of my sight. She stared at me for a long moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was going to apologize. Instead, she shrugged and picked up her purse. Fine, I'll stay at Melissa's tonight. Maybe you can use the time to update your precious calendar. The front door slammed behind her, and I was alone with the wreckage of everything I'd thought I knew about my life, that night lying in our bed that no longer felt like ours. I made myself a promise. I was done being the punchline, done being the guy who got laughed at while his wife smiled and played along. I was going to find out exactly what kind of game Lily was playing, and then I was going to win it. The next morning brought rain and the kind of hangover that feels like divine punishment. Lily hadn't come home, and her side of the bed was still made from the day before. I made coffee and toast, going through the motions of normalcy while my mind raced. I called in sick to work the first time in 3 years and spent the morning staring at my laptop screen trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of my brain kept insisting I was overreacting, that marriages go through rough patches, that people say things they don't mean when they're trying to fit in with their colleagues. But I couldn't shake the image of Lily's face at dinner, the cold satisfaction in her eyes. When Arthur made his jokes, that wasn't the face of someone who'd been put on the spot. That was the face of someone who was enjoying the show. Around noon my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Working late again tonight, we'll talk tomorrow. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened, just another late night at the office with Arthur and the gang. That's when I decided to do something I'd never done before in our 6 years of marriage. I decided to check up on my wife. I'm not proud of what came next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. When someone makes you feel like a fool, you have 3 choices. Stay a fool or get smart. I chose smart. Lily had always been careless with her passwords. She used the same one for everything, our wedding date followed by her initials. It took me exactly 30 seconds to log into her laptop and another 6 minutes to find what I was looking for. Her email account was a gold mine of information, work emails, personal correspondence, online shopping confirmations, and buried deep in a folder marked Minsk messages that made my stomach turn. The first one was from 3 weeks ago, sent to someone named George Crawford. "Can't wait to see you tonight. He is working late on some project, so we'll have the apartment to ourselves. Wear that cologne. I like her." George Crawford. I knew that name. He was one of Arthur's junior associates, a guy about my age with perfect hair and a smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. I'd met him at the same company parties where I'd met Arthur, and he'd always struck me as the kind of man who practiced his handshake in the mirror. I scrolled through more messages, each one a small dagger between my ribs. Lily and George had been seeing each other for at least 3 months, maybe longer. The emails were full of inside jokes, shared memories, and plans for future encounters. They talked about me like I was an obstacle to be worked around, a problem to be managed, but George wasn't the only one. Buried deeper in the folder were messages from Arthur himself. These were different, less romantic, more transactional. Arthur wrote, like a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and what he wanted was my wife. "Dinner was perfect. Last night." Read one message from 3 weeks ago. "Your husband has no idea how lucky he is. If he can't appreciate what he has, maybe it's time he learned to share." Lily's response made me want to put my fist through the laptop screen. "He's so clueless last night. He actually asked if I wanted to reconnect this weekend. I told him I was busy with work. He just nodded and went back to his computer. Sometimes I think he'd rather be married to his spreadsheets." I sat back in my chair feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just an affair. It was a complete betrayal of everything we built together. Lily wasn't just cheating on me. She was mocking me, sharing our private moments with the men she was cheating with. The worst part was how long it had been going on. The emails went back months, maybe longer, while I'd been working late to pay for our lifestyle. While I'd been planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways. Lily had been living a completely different life. My phone rang, startling me out of my dark thoughts. The caller ID showed Pete Kowalski, my best friend since college and one of the few people who'd never made me feel like I needed to apologize for existing. "Hey man." Pete's voice was cautious. "I heard about last night. Word travels fast. Melissa called Jenny this morning, said Lily showed up at her place. Pretty upset." Melissa was Pete's wife's sister and apparently Lily's go-to alibi for her extracurricular activities. I wondered how much Melissa knew, how many people were in on the joke. "I'm sure she was devastated," I said, not bothering to hide the bitterness in my voice. "Look, I don't know what happened exactly, but Jenny thinks maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or something. Work things out." "There's nothing to work out, Pete. It's over." Silence. On the other end of the line, Pete had been married to Jenny for 8 years, and they were one of those couples who still held hands in public. He believed in working things out and fighting for your marriage, in all the things I'd believed in until about 12 hours ago. "You sure about that?" I looked at the laptop screen at the evidence of my wife's double life spread out in black and white. "Yeah, I'm sure." "All right then." Pete's voice changed, became more businesslike. "What do you need?" That's why Pete was my best friend. No judgment. No lectures about the sanctity of marriage. Just a simple question. "What do you need?" "I need to know everything." I said, "How long it's been going on? Who else knows what they're saying about me? I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." "Consider it done. I'll make some calls." After Pete hung up, I spent the rest of the afternoon going through Lily's digital life with the methodical precision that had made me good at my job. I found more emails, text messages, even a few photos that made me want to throw the laptop out the window. But I also found something else, evidence that Arthur Lang wasn't the golden boy he pretended to be hidden in Lily's work. Emails were messages that suggested Arthur was playing fast and loose with company money, nothing overtly criminal, but enough creative accounting to raise eyebrows if the right people saw it. He was using company resources for personal projects, inflating expense reports, and generally behaving like someone who thought the rules didn't apply to him. I printed everything out, organized it into neat folders, and locked it all in my desk drawer. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but I had a feeling it might come in handy. Lily came home that night around 11, moving quietly through the apartment like she was trying not to wake me. I lay in bed pretending to be asleep, listening to her get ready for bed in the bathroom when she slipped under the covers beside me. I could smell cologne on her skin, expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "Leo," she whispered. "Are you awake?" I didn't answer. I just lay there in the dark listening to her breathe, thinking about all the nights she'd come home late, smelling like other men all the times. I'd been too trusting, too stupid, too willing to believe her excuses. "I'm sorry about last night," she said softly. "Arthur was drunk and things got out of hand. It won't happen again." Still, I said nothing. What was the point? We both knew she was lying. She rolled over, turning her back to me, and within minutes, her breathing had settled into the steady rhythm of sleep. But I lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, planning my next move because Lily was wrong about one thing. I wasn't clueless anymore, and I was done being the punchline. Pete called me the next morning with news that confirmed my worst fears and gave me hope at the same time. "It's worse than you thought," he said, without preamble. "But it's also better." I was sitting in my car outside a coffee shop, having left the apartment before Lily woke up. I couldn't stand the thought of sitting across from her at breakfast, pretending everything was normal while she texted her lovers under the table. "Give me the bad news first, everyone knows man. I mean everyone." Jenny talked to her sister, who talked to Melissa, who apparently has known about this for months. Lily's been using Melissa's place as a cover story, but she's actually been staying at George's apartment most of the time. I gripped the phone tighter. How long? At least 6 months with George. The thing with Arthur is newer, maybe 8 weeks. But here's the kicker. They don't even like each other. George and Arthur. I mean, they're both using Lily to get back at each other. Some kind of office politics thing that got personal. So I'm married to the prize in someone else's contest. Looks that way. But here's the good news. They're all idiots. Despite everything I almost smiled. Explain. Arthur's been bragging about his conquest to anyone who will listen. Apparently he thinks taking another man's wife makes him some kind of alpha male, and George has been doing the same thing, talking about how he's showing up the boss by getting there first. And Lily. Pete was quiet for a moment. Lily's been talking too about you, about your marriage, about how she's planning to file for divorce and take half of everything. The words hit like a physical blow, but I wasn't surprised. I'd seen enough evidence to know that Lily had checked out of our marriage long before I knew there was a problem. There's more. Pete continued. Arthur's been making calls to your clients, to people in your industry, spreading rumors about your work. Questioning your reliability. Word is he's trying to tank your business, so you'll be in a weaker position when the divorce happens. Now I was surprised and angry. Going after my marriage was one thing, but going after my livelihood crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. He's what I know, a guy who knows a guy at Morrison and Associates. Arthur's been telling people you're unstable, that you've been making threats, that you're the kind of guy who might do something crazy when his world falls apart. Classic character assassination. I sat in my car watching normal people go about their normal lives and felt something cold and calculating settle in my ch****t. Arthur Lang thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He thought he could destroy my marriage, steal my wife and ruin my career all at the same time. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Pete, I said. How would you like to help me with a little project? What kind of project? The kind that reminds certain people? Why, it's a bad idea to underestimate the quiet guy in the corner. Pete was silent for a long moment. Then, what do you need? That afternoon I put my plan into motion. The first step was reconnaissance, and I started with George Crawford. George worked in Arthur's department but kept different hours, while Arthur was a 9 to 6 guy who liked long lunches and early departures. George was a grinder who stayed late and came in on weekends. It was easy enough to find his routine. A quick call to Morrison and Associates pretending to be a client got me his schedule for the week. He lived in a trendy apartment complex downtown, the kind of place where young professionals paid too much rent to live in spaces the size of walk-in closets. His car was a silver Mother Series, and he parked it in the same spot every night, space 47 in the underground garage. I spent 3 days watching George's routine, learning his patterns, waiting for the right opportunity. It came on Friday night when he left for what I assumed was a date with my wife. The BMW was beautiful, pristine paint, spotless interior, the kind of car that represented everything George thought he was. I stood next to it in the dim garage, holding a small bag of supplies I'd picked up from various stores around town, and felt a moment of hesitation. What I was about to do would cross a line. Once I started down this path, there would be no going back to the man I'd been a week ago. The trusting husband, the guy who believed in working things out, the fool who thought love was enough, but that man was gone anyway, wasn't he? Arthur and Lily and George had taken care of that. I got to work. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity: no permanent damage, nothing that couldn't be fixed with time and money, but maximum humiliation for minimum effort. I had access to George's car without setting off any alarms, and I had all night to implement my surprise. By the time I was finished, George's pristine BMW looked like a crime scene from a seafood restaurant. The smell alone would take weeks to eliminate, and the visual impact would be immediate and devastating. I left a note on the windshield: "Don't take what doesn't belong to you, a friend." Then I went home to wait for the fireworks. They started Saturday morning at 7:23 a.m. when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Leo Blake?" The voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Depends. Who's asking this? Is George Crawford? I think you know why I'm calling." I really don't. Should I my car? You psycho. What you did to my car? I made my voice sound genuinely confused. I'm sorry, George, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Is there a problem with your car? You know exactly what the problem is. And if you think this is going to scare me away from Lily, you're wrong. She's done with you, man. She's moving on to you. That's right, interesting, because I could have sworn she was moving on to Arthur Lang. But maybe I'm confused. It's hard to keep track of all her extracurricular activities. Silence on the other end of the line. Then what are you talking about? Come on. George, you're a smart guy. You work in the same office. You must have noticed the way she looks at Arthur, the way she laughs at his jokes, the way she stays late when he stays late, or did you think you were the only one? More silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the pieces falling into place. You're lying, I tell you what? Why don't you ask her next time you're together, just casually bring up Arthur's name. See how she reacts. See if she gets that little smile she gets when she's thinking about something she's not supposed to be thinking about. You're sick, you know that maybe, but I'm not stupid and neither are you. George, at least I hope you're not. He hung up without another word, but I knew I'd planted the seed. George was ambitious, competitive, and insecure. Exactly the kind of man who would be driven crazy by the thought that someone else was getting something he thought belonged to him. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 3 began that evening when Lily came home early for the first time in weeks. She looked tired and stressed, and there were worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. How was your day? I asked, not looking up from my laptop. Fine, she said. But her voice lacked its usual confidence. Leo, did someone call you today about George Crawford? Your colleague? He said. I was welcome to his leftovers like she's a piece of meat he's done with. I made sympathetic noises while internally celebrating. This was going even better than I'd hoped. What are you going to do about it? I asked. What can I do? I'm just a junior associate. He's Arthur Lang. He's untouchable, is he? George looked up from his drink, focusing on me with difficulty. What do you mean? I mean, everyone has weaknesses. George, everyone has secrets they don't want exposed, even Arthur Lang. You sound like you know something. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. What would you say if I told you? Arthur's been stealing from the company, skimming money from client accounts, inflating expenses, the whole 9 yards. George's eyes widened. I'd say you were crazy. Arthur's worth millions. Why would he steal from Morrison and Associates? Because he can. Because he thinks he's smarter than everyone else, because men like Arthur Lang always think the rules don't apply to them. I pulled out my phone and showed him some of the financial documents Pete had obtained. George studied them with the focused attention of someone who understood what he was looking at. This ISIS is really bad, he said. Finally, it gets worse. He's also been using company resources to pay for his affairs. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts, all of it charged to fake consulting expenses. George was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told him. I could see the wheels turning, could see him starting to understand the possibilities. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Finally. Because Arthur Lang destroyed my marriage and now he's trying to destroy my career because he thinks he can treat people like disposable toys and never face any consequences. And because I think you and I might have more in common than either of us realized. What do you want me to do? Nothing illegal, nothing that could get you in trouble, just make sure the right people see the right information at the right time. George nodded. Slowly. I could do that. I have access to the company's financial systems. If someone were to accidentally forward some interesting documents to the senior partners. Accidents happen all the time in big companies, they do. Don't they? We shook hands across the table. 3 men who'd been betrayed by the same people, united in our desire for justice or revenge. At that point, the distinction didn't seem particularly important. I left Murphy's bar feeling better than I had in weeks. Arthur Lang had made the classic mistake of powerful men everywhere. He'd assumed that everyone he stepped on would stay down. But I wasn't staying down, and thanks to his own arrogance. I now had allies in places he never expected. The war was just beginning and I was starting to like my chances. That night Lily came home late again, but this time she looked troubled. She moved through our apartment like she was walking through a minefield, careful and tense. How was work? I asked from the couch. Complicated, she said. Not meeting my eyes. There's some kind of investigation going on. HR is asking questions about Arthur. What kind of questions? Personal questions about his relationship *PS with female employees. I made my voice sound concerned. That sounds serious. Is there anything you need to worry about? She looked at me sharply, searching my face for hidden meanings. Why would I need to worry about anything? No reason. It's just that office politics can get messy. When investigations start, People sometimes get caught up in things, even when they haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong, of course, not. I never said you had, but we both knew she was lying and we both knew that I knew she was lying. The pretense was wearing thin and the real Lily was starting to show through the cracks. I'm going to bed, she said abruptly. Good night, I hope tomorrow is less complicated. After she left the room, I opened my laptop and began planning the next phase of my campaign because Arthur Lang's troubles were just beginning and Lily's comfortable world of secrets and lies was about to come crashing down around her. I'd spent 6 years being the understanding husband, the guy who believed in second chances and working things out. That guy was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than Arthur Lang had ever imagined. The student was about to become the teacher. 3 weeks later, Arthur Lang's world began to collapse in earnest. It started with the financial audit, someone George presumably had made sure. The senior partners at Morrison & Associates received detailed documentation of Arthur's creative accounting practices. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough, and by Friday afternoon Arthur was sitting in a conference room trying to explain why he'd charged $17,000 in client entertainment to accounts that belonged to a non-profit organization. I watched from across the street as he emerged from the building that evening, his usual swagger replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man under siege. His Mercedes was gone, apparently seized as part of the investigation, and he had to call a taxi to get home. But that was just the appetizer. The main course came the following Monday when Patricia Lang received a package containing photographs of her husband with 3 different women, including my wife. Pete had outdone himself using contacts in the private investigation business to document Arthur's extracurricular activities in vivid detail. The photos were tasteful but damning. Arthur and Lily entering a hotel. Arthur and his secretary sharing an intimate dinner, Arthur and a third woman. I didn't recognize getting cozy in the back seat of his Mercedes, nothing explicit but enough to make Arthur's marriage as complicated as his professional life had suddenly become. Patricia Lang, it turned out, was not the kind of woman who suffered infidelity quietly. By Tuesday afternoon, she'd filed for divorce and frozen all of Arthur's accounts. By Wednesday, she'd hired the most vicious divorce attorney in the city and begun the process of taking Arthur apart piece by piece. I felt a little sorry for him almost, but my sympathy evaporated when Pete called with news about Arthur's latest move. He's escalating, Pete said without preamble. My guy at Morrison says Arthur's been making calls, trying to blame everything on Lily, says she seduced him, manipulated him, that she's the real mastermind behind the financial irregularities. I wasn't surprised. Men like Arthur always looked for someone else to blame when their world started falling apart, but I was impressed by his audacity. Even facing professional and personal ruin, he was still trying to control the narrative. How's Lily taking it? Not well. She got called into HR this morning for questioning word. Is they're considering terminating her employment pending a full investigation. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy for my wife. Whatever else she'd done, she didn't deserve to be Arthur's scapegoat. But the feeling passed quickly. Lily had made her choices, had decided that our marriage was worth sacrificing for a few months of excitement with men who saw her as nothing more than a conquest. Now she was learning what happened when you played games with people who had more power and fewer scruples than you did. There's something else. Pete continued, Arthur's been asking questions about you. Specifically, he's been trying to find out if you had anything to do with his recent troubles. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests he's starting to put pieces together. My guy thinks Arthur might be planning something, some kind of retaliation. I wasn't worried. Arthur Lang was a bully and a coward, the kind of man who was dangerous only when he had all the advantages. Now that he was fighting for his life, his true nature was showing through, but I was curious to see what he'd try. I didn't have to wait long Thursday evening. I was working late in my home office when I heard a car pull up outside through the window. I saw Arthur Lang getting out of a rental car, his face twisted with rage and desperation. He looked like he hadn't slept in days and his usually immaculate appearance was disheveled and unkempt. I opened the front door before he could knock. Arthur. This is unexpected. Cut the act. Blake. We both know why I'm here. He pushed past me into the apartment, looking around like he was casing the place. I closed the door and followed him into the living room, keeping my distance. Desperate men were unpredictable and Arthur looked very desperate indeed. I'm not sure I do know why you're here, I said calmly, but you're welcome to enlighten me. You think you're so smart. Don't you? The quiet little computer guy getting his revenge on the big bad executive who stole his wife. I think there's been some misunderstanding. Lily and I are having some marital difficulties, but I hardly think that's your fault. Arthur laughed, but it was the sound of a man on the edge of a breakdown. Marital difficulties, right. You've been planning this whole thing. Haven't you? The investigation, the photos, even that little punk George suddenly growing a backbone. It's all been you pulling strings from behind the scenes. I sat down in my favorite chair and gestured for Arthur to do the same. He remained standing, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. That's quite a theory, I said. But I'm just an IT consultant, Arthur. I fix computers and update software. I'm not really the mastermind type. Don't lie to me. I know it was you who sent those photos to Patricia. I know you're the one who's been feeding information to the senior partners, and I know you're the reason. George suddenly decided to grow a spine and start asking uncomfortable questions. He stopped pacing and fixed me with a stare that was probably meant to be intimidating instead. He just looked pathetic. A once powerful man reduced to making accusations he couldn't prove. Let's say you're right, I said quietly. Let's say I did orchestra *** trait your downfall. What exactly are you planning to do about it? I'm going to destroy you, your business, your reputation, your life. When I'm done with you, you'll be lucky to get a job fixing computers at some strip mall electronics store with what influence you're unemployed. Arthur, your wife is divorcing you. Your colleagues think you're a thief and your reputation is in ruins. What exactly do you think you can do to me that you haven't already tried? For the first time since he'd arrived, Arthur looked uncertain. I could see him, realizing that his threats were empty, that he no longer had the power to hurt me the way he'd planned. Besides, I continued, even if you could destroy my career, what would be the point? You'd still be a disgraced executive with a failed marriage and a criminal investigation hanging over your head. Hurting me wouldn't change any of that. Arthur's face went through a series of expressions: rage, frustration, and finally something that looked like defeat. He slumped into the chair across from me, suddenly looking every one of his 48 years. She was never worth it, you know, he said. Quietly. Lily. I thought she was special, but she's just another ambitious woman who thinks her looks can get her whatever she wants. Then why did you risk everything for her? Because I'm an idiot, because I thought I was smarter than everyone else, because I've spent my whole life taking what I wanted and never facing any real consequences. He looked up at me with eyes that were almost pleading. But you can't let this stand. Blake, what you've done to me, it's not proportional. I had an affair with your wife, so you destroyed my entire life. That's not justice. That's revenge. You're right. I said it is revenge, but it's not just about the affair, Arthur. It's about the way you humiliated me in front of a room full of people. It's about the calls you made to my clients trying to destroy my business. It's about the complete lack of respect you showed for me as a human being. I leaned forward, my voice growing harder. You didn't just take my wife, Arthur. You tried to take everything: my dignity, my livelihood, my future. You wanted to leave me with nothing while you laughed about it with your friends. So this is payback. This is consequences. For the first time in your life, you're facing real consequences for your actions, and you don't like it. Arthur sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up again, there was something different in his eyes, not defeat exactly, but acceptance. What happens now? He asked. Now. You rebuild your life. You find a new job. You work on your marriage. If Patricia will have you, and you try to become a better person than you were, and if I can't, if it's too late for all that, I shrugged, then you live with the consequences of your choices. Just like everyone else. Arthur stood up slowly like an old man getting out of bed. You know, Blake, I think I underestimated you from the beginning. I thought you were just another weak husband who'd roll over and take whatever I dished out. Most people underestimate the quiet guy in the corner. It's one of our advantages. He walked toward the door, then turned back. For what it's worth. I'm sorry about the dinner, about the calls to your clients, about all of it. You didn't deserve that. No. I didn't. Will that make any difference going forward? I mean. I thought about it for a moment. Ask me in a year after Arthur left. I poured myself a drink and sat in the quiet apartment, thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The man who'd walked out of that restaurant in humiliation was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not, but it was definitely a permanent thing. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily: coming home late. We need to talk. I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. We'd talked enough now. It was time for both of us to face the consequences of our choices and figure out what came next. The war was over and I'd won, but Arthur felt different than I'd expected, not triumphant, but hollow. Like waking up from a fever dream to find that the world had changed while you were sleeping outside. The city went about its business, full of people living their quiet lives, making their small compromises, building their modest dreams. I envied them their simplicity, their ability to believe that love was enough, and that good people were rewarded for their goodness. But I wasn't one of them anymore. I was something else now, something harder and more dangerous than Arthur Lang had ever imagined, and I was just fine with. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening and see you in the next videos.